Lemonada.
Welcome to Worth It from the Minnesota Star Tribune. I'm Melissa Townsend. Your regular host, Nicole Norfleet, is out this week. Each week on the show, we share the happenings around Minnesota that we think are worth your time, your attention, and your money. But today, we're doing something different. We're focusing on one story that we think really is worth your time. One of the things the Star Tribune does really well is deep investigations. And so today we're going to talk with two reporters about their ongoing investigation into what happened earlier this summer on June 14th. That was the day that Melissa and Mark Hortman were murdered, and Jim and Yvette Hoffman were shot and injured. Melissa Hortman, of course, was a state representative and former Speaker of the Minnesota House of Representatives, and John Hoffman is a state senator. It was a terrible tragedy that's left their families and their communities grieving. You probably know a man named Vance Boelter is charged with 14 counts related to the murder and the injury of the Hortmans and Hoffmans. That includes federal and state charges. He has pleaded not guilty and is in the Sherburne County Jail awaiting trial. What you may not know is that while he's there, he's reaching out to reporters from different media outlets. He reached out to Star Tribune reporter Sarah Nelson a few weeks ago, and she's been messaging with him. Meanwhile, our reporter Jeff Meitrot has been talking with Boelter's friends and the parishioners who attend his church. Sarah Nelson and Jeff Meitrot are here with me now. Hi, you two.
Hi.
What specifically are you hoping to learn about Vance Boelter?
Well, the big mystery is, how could a man who all of his friends have described as a devout Christian, and so therefore, how could a devout Christian have done the things that he's been accused of? You know, that's, to me, the central mystery. And so it's a character study. We want to know who this person is. We want to know what motivates him. We want to know how he thinks.
Sarah?
Yeah, I think that's the question on every Minnesotan's mind, is what led to this point. And like Jeff said, everyone we've talked to, and even prosecutors and investigators have said, people they have talked to said this was so out of character for him.
You talked about him being a devout Christian. I know you found video of him preaching at gatherings in Africa. Tell me about those.
Vance has been preaching sort of as a lay preacher for many years, ever since he got out of a Bible college in Texas.
So hang on, lay preacher. So is he ordained like a minister?
He claims to be, but we can't find any evidence of that.
Okay.
But like many fundamentalist Christians, you know, he believes in missionary work, spreading the word, getting out there, converting as many Christians as possible. And so these sermons in Africa were part of that outreach effort.
Where in Africa?
He was in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Why is that? I mean, is there a reason that place?
He had extraordinarily ambitious plans. He not only wanted to be there and converting Christians by giving sermons, he was trying to create businesses that would allow him to hire people and also then get to know them and help convert them in the workplace. And in these religious circles, business goes hand in hand with religion. And it's all part of this sort of master plan of converting 1 billion people from non-believers to believers, and that will hasten the second coming of Jesus Christ. That is one of the core beliefs of this sort of brand of the Evangelical Church.
So let's dive into this brand of the Evangelical Church. So you've been digging deep into his sort of Christian life. We know he grew up in Sleepy Eye. What was his sort of religious life like there in his early years?
He was raised Lutheran, and he was, from what we can tell, a good Lutheran. He didn't swear. He didn't drink. You know, he didn't do a lot of stuff that teenage boys do. But at the age of 17, when he was working in a canning factory, he had a conversion experience. He heard God. He had this sort of crisis of faith. And in sort of true evangelical fashion, the presence of God literally sort of made himself known to Vance. And then he later had a sort of separate encounter with the Holy Spirit, which is, again, sort of classic in this sort of, in these circles. And so at that point, his life really takes a different trajectory. And he becomes a very sort of in-your-face Christian. He's on college campuses preaching. He is in the town square. He burns all of his belongings and lives in a tent. And,
He burns all of his belongings?
Yeah, it's part of this sort of, if you unburden yourself with material wealth, perhaps you can be closer to God. And so he really becomes this proselytizer in sort of whatever setting he's in. And from what we can tell, it drove some of his friends crazy. He even suggests that maybe his family didn't really embrace or understand his religious impulses. But that set him on the course that ultimately landed him in Africa.
So that's what his life looks like as a teenager. He burns his stuff. He's preaching wherever he can, and people are trying to understand what he's up to.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we all saw those guys on the street corners when we were going to college, it's Saturday night and they're screaming at us about, here's what the Bible says and don't drink and don't fornicate. He was one of those guys. And one of his issues, of course, was abortion. And all the friends that we've talked to have said if there was a political issue that Vance really cared about and talked about a lot, it was abortion. That was the only thing that a lot of people remember whenever political issues came up. That would be an issue he talked about. He even preached about it when he was in the Congo.
Okay, so that's his life as a teenager. And then we know he went to St. Cloud State University. What happened there?
So he goes to college. He's there for a year or two, and he meets a guy named David Emerson. And David Emerson becomes his sort of first spiritual mentor. And David is connected to sort of some fringe elements within the evangelical church. David, shortly thereafter, goes to Zimbabwe as part of a missionary effort. And he and 16 other people are hacked to death by political extremists because they didn't want them there. And I think that the martyrdom of David Emerson was, a very big event in Vance Boelter's life.
Did he write about it? Has he talked about it?
He talks about it. He preaches about it. This was a seminal figure. He even named his only son after David Emerson. His name is David Emerson Boelter.
Oh. So did Vance Boelter finish college?
Later. He dropped out of college to go to a Bible school down in Texas, Christ for the Nations Institute. He got a degree of sorts from them. Then later went back to St. Cloud State and got a degree. Not that he ever really used it. He went into the food business and mostly stayed close to home, had a lot of kids, and went to church.
Yes, we know he has 5 children. Back to Christ for the Nations Institute, that school in Texas. Tell me about what they teach.
All right, so this is a church that has been very influential in evangelical circles. They have graduated and had teaching there people who are now sort of leaders in the evangelical community. Many of them are close to Donald Trump, and they are sort of credited with creating a lot of support among sort of right-wing evangelicals that have helped get Donald Trump a second term. One of the things that they talk about is violent prayer. Another thing they talk about is spiritual warfare. A lot of these churches and these Bible schools, they adopt all these sort of militaristic language. And a lot of people think that language has gone too far. But that in a sense, is what CFNI is. They were helping create sort of, warriors for God, to go out there and to do missionary work and to sort of help bring about the second coming by converting 1 billion Christians.
1 billion Christians, convert 1 billion.
That was the magic number.
Huh. So it sets you up to believe that your role in the world is to bring around the second coming of Christ by converting people to Christianity.
Right. And the idea is that second coming is around the corner. It's something that's real, and it's something that's near. And so get right with God now, because if you don't, you're going to hell.
Mm-hmm. And what does getting right with God mean?
It means being the right kind of Christian. Mm-hmm. There are good Christians and there are bad Christians. And it's very sort of judgmental. And if you do not believe that the Bible is truly the Word of God and every word of it is true, and it gives you sort of the plan and the instructions for how you're supposed to live your life, then you are not a good Christian. They called Methodists apostates because they allowed gay clergy, which is beyond the pale because the Bible condemns homosexuality. And so if it's not in the Bible, if the Bible is against it, then we have to be against it. If the Bible is for it, you have to be for it.
Has the school issued a statement or had a reaction to Boelter allegedly committing these crimes?
Yeah, like most of the religious institutions that he's affiliated with, they have condemned his actions and said that is not what they teach, that is not who they are, that is not what they're about.
And what do Boelter's friends say? Who have you talked to, and what have they said about him?
We've talked to everybody we could. We have talked to people who homeschooled their kids with him. We have talked to his best friends since he was in grade school. We've talked to people who went to church with him. We've talked to his pastor. And the picture that we get is of a man who, once he had something in his head, once he had a plan, an idea, he became obsessively committed to it, even when all of his friends were saying, no, Vance, don't quit your job to do that. It's not working out. He was not going to be deterred.
Obsessive is the word that sticks with me. From
Absolutely.
We need to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll hear what Vance Boelter himself has been saying to our reporter, Sarah Nelson.
If you like Worth It, you should know it's just a tiny taste of all that the Minnesota Star Tribune has to offer. We've got an all-access pass to everything Minnesota, from outdoor adventures to the hottest food spots you've never heard of. From puzzles and games to the best concerts and happenings around the state. It's all here all the time. So subscribe to the Minnesota Star Tribune. It's a great deal. Go to startribune.com/worthit to subscribe. That's worth it to subscribe, all one word.
Okay, Sarah, Jeff has been talking to people around Vance Boelter. You have been messaging with him. How did that start?
So we had been hoping to reach out to Vance for a while and hear his thoughts, just like we do oftentimes with other suspects. And while we were hoping for that to happen, a friend of his reached out and emailed me and said that Vance would like to speak with me on the jail's messaging system, which never happens, by the way. Sources don't magically just show up to your doorstep very often, so that was kind of a surprise. So he had reached out and said he wanted to talk, and he'd been reading our coverage. And I had a conflict the day he recommended, and so we tried to pass the interview off to another reporter who had more of a free day that day, and Vance rejected the interview and said he only wanted to talk to me. So he ended up having new attorneys come in who recommended that he pump the brakes a little bit, and they wanted to speak with him before that happened. So the video interview got canceled, and after that, we just started peppering him with questions.
How did it feel that he just wanted to talk to you?
I think I was so in reporting mode, I didn't stop to think, this is a man who's been accused of these crimes. I think it was more just, holy smokes, this happened. This is what we've been looking for weeks.
So I don't think a lot of people have actually messaged people in jail. So how did it work?
It's a system that kind of looks like a chat room. It brought me back to my AOL instant messaging days. And so you can send 200 characters at a time, and each message cost 25 cents. And so in his opening message, he introduced himself as, "Hi, Sarah, this is Vance Boelter." And he actually apologized that I had to pay for his messages because all of his money was taken into evidence.
What was your first question to him?
So we asked him two questions. The first one, we brought up his sermons in Africa, where he said America is in a very bad place.
I have a quote from that sermon, and here's what he says. America is in a bad place. And then he goes on, many churches in America didn't listen to Jesus. They're divided, and the enemy, the devil, comes through and rips everything apart. The churches are so messed up, they don't know abortion is wrong. God will raise an apostle or a prophet to correct their course. So you asked him what he meant by that. What did he say?
He wasn't quite sure which sermon I was referring to, but he said he was probably referring to the fact that the U.S. has had very strong impact on the DRC, and he gave a very lengthy response about what that means and the history there.
It was like a Wikipedia entry.
Yes, exactly. He just talked at length about the DRC.
Was it political? Less religious, more political?
No, nothing political about it, nothing religious. It was very much just facts.
What was striking to me was how he, in a sense, characterized what his business efforts over there were. And we knew that he was trying to create networks of fisher people and of farmers, but we didn't really understand what the point of it all was. And he actually addressed that in his communications with us in ways that were really sort of staggering to me. Once again, very audacious plans. He was thinking that he was going to turn the DRC, the Congo, into the breadbasket of Africa, and that it wouldn't just produce enough food to feed its own population. It would create so much food that it could take care of all of Africa's problems.
He sort of feels like he is going to be this huge presence, making major things happen.
Yeah, I mean, one sort of pattern to me is that there's sort of this grandiose thinking, these plans, very big plans, and it never works out. I mean, he's had one failure after another, and you have to wonder how much of that may have played into what happened this summer.
Yeah. So what else did you ask?
So we asked him whether he thinks America is in a very bad place. And the second question was kind of related, where we asked if he felt he was put on this earth to heal that divide. And he flat out rejected that and said he doesn't think he has anything to do with the second coming, which is often seen as a full healing in the evangelical world about the restoration of earth. He rejected it and asked that I not write about that because that was something that I threw out there, not him.
Did he say anything about the alleged crime? We know he's pleaded not guilty, but has he said that he's done it, or is he alluding to the idea that he's done it?
No, that never was really brought up in any of our conversations with him. He really tried to portray himself as a simple man of God.
What stands out to you from your exchange with him? You've had a number of messages back and forth, right?
Yes. I think for me, what's been most surprising maybe is how at ease he's been. That has kind of gelled with observations from other people who have visited the jails and seen him, like attorneys. They said he's very at ease and he doesn't seem shaken. And he hasn't talked about any conspiratorial plots or anything else that's referenced in his indictment. He's been very straightforward.
Given the allegations against him, I find him incredibly lucid and talks in almost biblical terms.
What do you mean?
All the language sounds like it comes right from the Bible. I mean, even if he's not directly quoting it, it's just like that cadence, that language is something that is so much a part of his personality that's how he expresses himself.
Yeah, and you mentioned conspiracies. He sent a message to the FBI and other media organizations, and he said his explanation for what happened is related to some grand conspiracy, and he really wants to go public with that. Has he gotten into any of those details with you?
No, not at all.
How has he talked about religion in your messages?
So we've sent him a bunch of questions, and a lot of them had to do with his upbringing and this epiphany he had at 17 years old. We asked him about David Emerson and the impact that he had on his life. He mentioned something that was completely new to us when he said that in order to pay for the projects he had in Africa, he cashed in his 401k and downsized and sold their house to free up funds for the project. So that was a new piece of information that we hadn't known yet.
Wow. So really changed his lifestyle.
It really uprooted his entire life.
He put everything on the line.
And at some point in those messages, he brought up the fact that he believes that if you break one commandment, you break all of them. And so we also sent a follow-up question about how a lot of his friends are wrestling with how such a devout person can be accused of these crimes. And that was the one question he refused to answer.
He said, let me see how you handle the information I gave you first. And I see that as him trying to control the narrative.
We'll take another quick break here, but when we come back, we'll talk about the reaction from religious scholars and his home church here in Minnesota. The murders of the Hortmans happened in the early hours of June 14th. Later that morning, Boelter sent a text message to his family saying, "Dad went to war last night." Jeff, given what you know about his religious background, the teachings that he's absorbed, the things his friends have said, what do you think he meant by that?
That specific phrase was something that really stood out to the religious scholars that I talked to. because they were sort of positing the question, well, who was he at war with? Did they know they were at war with him? And of course the answer is no. They had no idea. This was a war that was going on in his mind. And we know that he was trained in the art of spiritual warfare, and that there is this battle between good and evil, and that if he's going to be a true Christian, then he's got to be on the side of Jesus. And that means beating those who have been possessed by the evil one. And so how far did he take that? That is, to a lot of his friends and fellow parishioners, that's the $64,000 question.
You also visited his church here in Minnesota, the Jordan Family Church in a small town called Jordan. The church, I guess, was founded 3 years ago, and he was part of that founding and has been going ever since. I know you talked with pastors and parishioners there. What's their reaction to his arrest? What are they saying?
My takeaway was that this is a church that's in crisis, that what he did has really shaken these parishioners to their core. They sat next to this person. They prayed with this person. The disconnect is so big to them that they are wrestling with the same questions that I think the rest of Minnesota is how could he have done it? Why did he do it? And are there things that he took from our church, and when I say our church, I mean the larger evangelical movement, and twisted them to justify what he did? And it was even, I think, very much the topic of the sermon this week, which was, what is God's will? And the question posed by the speaker was, how could God let so many terrible things happen in the name of Christianity? And their answer was, well, it's because some people take the Bible and they misinterpret it, and they don't follow God's plan.
So you went to the service, and what was it like? What was the feel of the place?
It's a very sort of typical evangelical service, though it's shorter than the ones that I've gone to in the past. These can often stretch to 3 hours plus. This was an hour long. There's a lot of singing and a very long sermon, about 30 minutes long. And, it's clearly all about the message that week. And the message this week, like I said, was what is God's will? And also the news that the pastor, Ken Krause, who's led this church for 3 years, and his predecessor church for, I think, at least 10 years, would be moving on. He was going to be taking a sabbatical and needed a break. And that was pretty surprising news because this church has had only one leader since it was started.
So the minister of Boelter's church is leaving.
He's leaving his leadership position. He's going to still be a member of the church, but he's not going to be its pastor.
Do you think that has to do with Boelter?
It's kind of hard not to connect the dots, but he didn't directly address his reason for it.
You recorded the sermon from that day, and I want to play one clip from that. The pastor talks about how you make good decisions and follow God's will. And he says you've got resources. You've got the church, you've got the scripture, and then he says this. Let's listen.
Church, you don't have to look back and worry and say, I made the wrong decision in life. If you commit your activities to the Lord, if you follow God's will and desire, if you pursue holiness, and if you grow in sanctification, God's will and decree will establish your plans.
So, when I hear that, I don't hear divisive language like us and them. I don't hear like go, people are defying God's word. But I do hear this idea that if you commit yourself to God, what you do is God's will. What do religious scholars think about these teachings?
When they listened to the sermons, they said this sounds like a very classic evangelical church, that it's both in terms of how it talks and deals with political issues and how it deals with matters of faith, that it's fairly middle of the road.
You listened back to several sermons from Jordan Community Church, right?
A full year's worth, yeah.
Yeah. And how would you characterize those?
Again, I was struck by how often they bring up the second coming and how urgent that is as a real thing that's going to happen. And what your role as a good Christian is, and what happens if you do not follow God's plan.
And what happens if you do not?
You're going to hell.
Anything else that you took away from your conversations with religious scholars about his evangelical Christian background?
When they listened to the Africa sermons, they said that it fits within the sphere of classic evangelical thought, which is that the divisions within America's churches are a problem, and the lack of unity on important issues like access to abortion, that all churches need to be on the same page. When it comes to gay clergy, all churches need to be on the same page. It's not an extreme position, but it is one that is fairly mainstream for that movement.
Sarah, you and I talked before this conversation, and you told me that you're someone with an evangelical upbringing. What's it like talking about the possible connection between the murder of the Hortmans and the shooting of the Hoffmans and the evangelical church?
Yeah, I had an evangelical upbringing throughout my childhood and adult life. Maybe not to the extent that we were talking about the second coming very frequently, but this whole world was not super foreign to me. And in fact, it was actually kind of an asset in this story because it drove a lot of my reporting. I was able to kind of know the language that they use often. And kind of the way that it helped shape my thinking on this is how Jeff earlier said that in the evangelical world, business and religion go hand in hand. It's also true from my experience that politics and religion go hand in hand. You are constantly fighting against a world that is slipping away, and you have to stand against that because that's God's will. You have to fight that as much as you can.
So in the beginning of this conversation, I asked what you were looking for, and your focus here has been on his religious background.
Because it's clear that nothing else is important to him as his religious life. Matters of faith have driven him since he was a teenager and has informed every major decision he's ever made. And so the idea is, well, then how could it not have been involved with what happened this summer? And we have heard from people within the church who have connected the dots that way themselves, who believe that the sort of us versus them mentality has seeped in very deeply into his subconscious and has informed his thinking and perhaps poisoned his thinking.
Last question for you guys. What else are you still curious about? What else do you want to know about this person?
I'm fascinated with how he took the church's teachings and converted that into an action plan. I want to know what chat rooms he's been hanging out in. I want to know what websites he's been visiting. I want to know what media he's been paying attention to. I want to know who, like, the other authorities in his life are that we don't know about.
Because he stopped responding and said he wants to see how we report the information we have about him first, we do have a lot of questions that went unanswered. And obviously the biggest one is, to what degree, if any, religion played a part in what happened on June 14th.
Sarah, Vance Boelter reached out to you specifically. Do you think there's any way that's because of your evangelical background?
I am not 100% sure. I think I would be surprised at that, only because he's told me he's read my stories and is aware I'm covering his court case right now. So I think that has more to do with it, perhaps. But I'm just not 100% sure.
Well, thank you both for being here, and I'll look forward to seeing more of your reporting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. We'll be back again next week. Worth It is a co-production of the Minnesota Star Tribune and Lemonada Media. It's normally hosted by Nicole Norfleet. The production team includes me, Melissa Townsend, Chrissy Pease, and Tiffany Bowie, with help from Zoe Jackson and Casey Darnell. It's mixed by Johnny Vince Evans with technical help from Matt Gilmer. Our theme was composed by Dan Molad. Lemonada's Senior Vice President of Weekly Content and Production is Steve Nelson. Greg Meese is the Deputy Managing Editor at the Star Tribune over audio, video, and photo. Executive producers are Stephanie Whittles-Wax and Jessica Cordova-Kramer. Help others find our show by leaving us a rating and writing a review. And you can follow Worth It wherever you get your podcasts or listen ad-free on Amazon Music with your Prime membership.